Hello and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. We unboxed them, we built them, and in this episode, we're going to paint them. Gaunt's Ghosts coming up right. It's time to paint Gaunt's Ghosts. And I'm struggling a little bit about not just how to paint these guys, but also how to present the painting of them. They're a unit, so they're going to be similar, but the models are pretty different. And so this is essentially going to be a painting video with 6 different characters all at once. And I don't want to do, 7 hours of painting this project online. Nobody's going to watch 7 hours of that kind of content. So I think I'm going to kind of boil it down. I'm going to do most of the painting on Gaunt and his buddy here, Try Again Bragg. Most of the paint scheme is going to be the same for all of these models. So I will base and wash Gaunt in kind of the same way I'm going to do everyone else. And then for detailing and things like that, I might highlight a thing or two for each of the different models. But I think that's the way of doing this video while still showing you what I'm doing, and also not boring the crap out of you, which might still happen, but not because it's a 7-hour video. So that's the plan. And for painting, I think I've decided on 2 major things. One of them is for the cape. The source material has this as kind of like a dark green kind of camo pattern cloak, and I think that looks really, really cool. But I don't have any illusions that I'll get anything close to that, so I'm gonna have to do something different. And I think what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to go with kind of a leather cloak. So the cloak will be leather, the boots and gloves will be leather, for those that have gloves. And I'll, once I base the leather cloak, I'll go ahead and give it a nice dark wash. And that should do the trick. I'm not going to go for any fancy blending techniques because I'm just not good at them yet. And I don't want to butcher this model. So I'm going to keep it really simple. So if you have rudimentary painting skills like me, this will be a nice, not necessarily guide, but just an example of how I approach this model. One of the only things I changed with this guy is this right here. The bolt pistol is different from what he originally came equipped with. This one's a bit more ornate. I got it from the Space Marines Vanguard Veteran Squad. There was a couple of bolt pistols left over, and those were nicer looking than the one Gaunt was equipped with. Since he's kind of a badass, I wanted him to have something a bit more ornate. Now, I wanted to do the same thing with a chainsword, but I ended up not doing it. For the simple reason that I did not have an ornate chainsword. This one has, a little decoration. And I was going to take a chainsword from the same kit as before, the Vanguard Veteran Squad, but there was a critical problem. That kit included only right-handed chainswords. It did not include any left-hand chainswords. So I could not replace that. I could have maybe cut here and replace kind of just the sword part, leave the hand part alone. But even there, the chainswords are different enough in construction that it wouldn't be a simple cut. It would be kind of a more involved cut, and then it would look kind of weird. So I just left it as is. I guess the other point that kind of helped me decide not to substitute this chainsword was that the hand bit, if I replaced it at the hand level, then Gaunt would have a Space Marine's hand, which is substantially bigger, and it's, it looks armored, and here, at best, Gaunt is wearing gloves. So that is kind of that, where that's concerned. So I kept the original chainsword, but I did replace the bolter. I think it looks much nicer. I think Gaunt deserves a nice looking bolt pistol. So that was the extent of my modifications. I didn't modify anything else on any of the other models. So it was a relatively small and honestly inconsequential add or substitution, but I did it anyway, mostly because I tried drilling out the other bolt pistol and I messed it up, so the barrel was gone. So I said, well, now I have to replace the entire bolt pistol, and so I did. It was a relatively easy swap. So, yeah, it's alright. So I'm going to start with basing. I'm going to base the cloak with a dark brown. In this case, I'm using the Armory Painter's Oak Brown. It's a nice dark brown. I wanted to stay with the kind of hiding in the swamp, don't look at me, I'm a piece of mud kind of a vibe. So that's the approach I'm taking here. Also, you'll note that I'm priming this. I primed this model in a slightly different color. I usually prime in gray or white, but especially for Imperial Guard units, that was leaving the highlights kind of a cold white or a cold gray, and it looked okay, but I thought it could do better. And I thought that the bone white primer would give me kind of a warmer earth tone sort of highlight. So I'm going to try that with this model and also other Imperial Guard units. And I'm going to do both sides of the cloak the same color, but I'm going to wash them slightly differently. I want the underside of the cloak to look darker than the outer side, you know, because it's in shadow and all that, but I still want it to have the same basic color. Alright, so the leathery parts are pretty much done. Yeah, they look pretty decent. Maybe a little darker than I was expecting. The highlights or the under prime or the priming doesn't show up almost at all, but there is a little bit, so there's something to work with there. For the main body, so like the pants and stuff like that, I want to go with something kind of like the source material. There's like a really dark black, and I don't have any dark black. I'm sorry, it's a really dark blue, and I don't have any dark blues. So I'm mixing something up that I'm hoping will be a nice mix between blue and black, which I can then darken up to a near black. And so I mixed together a little bit of deep blue and just a lot less of this. It's Necromancer Cloak. It's a dark gray. So I'm not quite sure what the ratios are. I know there's more blue than there's gray because I didn't want it to read like a really dark blue. I don't know what it's going to look like. So I'm going to try a little sample on this bit of sprue that I clipped, and I'm going to see what it looks like here so I can test the mix a little bit to make sure that that's the blue that I want. And honestly, I think it's a little too blue, but maybe after I darken it up with some dark wash, maybe it'll show up as more dark. Oh, I don't know why I'm having trouble focusing. There it is. It might be a little too blue. I'm going to add just a drop or two, just a tiny little bit of matte black, just to darken it up a skosh more. I mean, it's a bit darker. I think where I'm going to stop. I'm going to go with that shade, and then with a little bit of dark wash, I might end up where I want to be. So I'll start with Bragg's. Start giving them a generous base of this guy, of this paint. Alright, Commissar Gaunt and Dragon Bragg, they're both based, and it looks okay. I did something a little different for Commissar Gaunt. You'll notice there's a slight color difference between his pants and his tunic. Now, most of the other units in this, well, most of the other models in this unit are not going to have this two different color kind of arrangement. They're all going to have this kind of a really dark blue for their uniform. But Commissar Yark is a commissar, so this is probably like a greatcoat or some kind of coat as a symbol of office. So even though, you know, these guys are kind of, you know, deep in the jungle, setting up sniper positions and doing, you know, Commissar Gaunt things, I figured he's going to still wear a badge of office. So that includes that kind of uniform coat and that red sash, which, you know, the red sash is probably not great for camouflage, so, you know, there'll be some suspension of disbelief for this model. That's okay. He's a heroic figure, so he deserves to stand out a little bit. So I did give him this dark gray coat, and the idea is I'm going to wash these out so that they're pretty dark. I want to keep the idea of camouflage, or, you know, kind of colors that are darker so that they'll blend in, him and his units, they'll blend into their surroundings. And so I'm going to go with a pretty dark wash on both the pants and the coat. And then for the leathery parts, I'll do a kind of a dark brown wash, but not kind of a black wash. For the wash, I'm going to go with this dark tone. It's probably as close as the Army Painter line gets to a Nuln Oil, which is still very hard for me to say for some reason. And so I'm just going to give him a generous coating of the stuff on the darker. And so the idea is, while yes, his pants and uniform have some color, I want it to be nearly black with just a hint of that blue underneath or the gray underneath. And I think that this dark tone will help me achieve that look, especially if I apply it liberally. And I might need a coat or two of this to get the effect I'm looking for. But I'm going to avoid the leather parts like his belt and stuff like that, and the boots, because I have a different color wash in mind for those. Still darkening them up, but not quite as much. So that's what his uniform looks like right now. I'll do the rest of these bits and I'll show you what it looks like once it dries. I hope to be very happy with the outcome. Hope. To wash the leather parts, I'm going to go with some strong tone. It's a darker brown. It should do a very nice job of darkening up these dark brown leather parts. And I want to make sure it recesses mostly in the shadows, but I want all of it, this whole part, to be darkened up quite a bit. Now this dries quite a bit lighter than you think, so you want to be kind of liberal with it, but also you want to make sure that it pools in exactly the places that you want it to pool. So any kind of shadow part, any part that's not going to be exposed to sunlight or is kind of, you know, below the surface of any other part. And so now that I've got a nice coating, I want to make sure that I go back and I deposit a nice shadow in each of the deepest recesses. So something like this is what I'm talking about. It's pretty wet right now, so it's not going to look like this when it dries. I'll do the same thing to the underside, although the underside I want it to be even darker than the top side. So I'll probably go over this wash pass with a dark tone so that it blackens it up a bit, kind of to show that there's some shadows underneath the cape. But I'll need to let this wash dry first. This is how I try to add depth to my models. In other words, instead of adding highlights and shadows manually, I let the wash do the work for me. Obviously, it doesn't do as good a job as some of the advanced painting techniques, like wet blending and highlighting and all that stuff, but it's appropriate for my skill level, which, you know, not quite zero, but not quite to the point where I could do the fancier techniques. At some point, I'll get good enough with enough practice and experience, but for now, I have to understand my limitations, and if I want a decent-looking model, this is how I get there. And if you're watching this, you're probably kind of a beginner as well, and this is probably how you'll do a similar effect. Making sure that I get anything that's leather. So I did the boots. Right now I'm doing the gloves. And you kind of have to pay attention to where things are on this model because, sorry, on this whole kind of kit. Because while they're all essentially the same, things are in different places for each of these models. And so there might be a dagger hilt in a different place. There might be a collar in a different place. There might be, you know, a hand or a glove somewhere else. So you just kind of have to be careful to make sure you get everything exactly where you intended to get it. I should point out that it's very important when you're doing this, especially on the capes. You're going to be using quite a bit of wash to, you know, make sure it pools in all the recesses. It's important to make sure it dries kind of vertically in the orientation that it's going to hang on the model. This, since you're painting it kind of what it's supposed to look like, when it dries, because we have so much wash, it's so wet, if you hang it upside down like this, it's gonna go up and it's gonna pool in weird places, and that almost happened here with Commissar Gaunt's cloak. So I was able to catch it before it dried all the way, and I attempted to fix it, but it's not as cool looking as it was before. And I don't have this one oriented so that I can hang it kind of in the proper orientation. So I just have to keep an eye on it, make sure it dries in the right way. So not something you have to worry about normally, but for a model like this with lots and lots of cape, make sure to keep an eye on that. Here's my unit of Gaunt's Ghosts. They've been based and they've got their washes all set. And I went ahead and did the rest of the squad. I've been working with just these two up until now, at least on this video. But once these two were based and washed, I went ahead and did the same to all 6 models in this unit. And it's been interesting. And so far, these look like nothing I've done before. They're... I don't know, I think I've made them really, really dark, and I like the way they look. the extensive use of the washes has given them a shine, a gloss I don't really like, but you know, I'll take care of that at the end with a little satin varnish. One of the things that I continue to have trouble with is gluing my models together once they've been painted. And so I'll show you what I mean here. I've had to do some touch-ups with the first two models where I'll accidentally get some kind of glue on my finger, and then, you know, something like that'll happen where I touch another part of the model and it just completely takes off the paint. It's not as easy to see here, but I'll give you an example. Oh, it happened here. This was really gross. It's supposed to be an entirely black gun, but I somehow got a little bit of glue on my fingertip and bam. So I think the first step is going to be touching up pieces like that. There's not a ton, but there's enough that it's kind of a pain. The other thing that I need to do is go in and touch up places that I've missed. So you'll see kind of the back of his skull. I went ahead and so I had primed it, and I added the kind of the face, the kind of the flesh color, and then some flesh wash over it. It looks pretty decent, but there's a spot on the back of his head that isn't even primed, and that's because it was sitting on one of these little doohickeys. I'm normally fairly good at finding a way of orienting the part on the doohickey so that this doesn't happen. I mean, it still happens a little bit, but not as much. So I've got this thing going on in various places, and so I need to fix that. So this next step is just going to be spending some time with the touch-ups before I proceed to the next step. It's really exciting and glamorous, so I'm totally not going to show it to you because nobody wants to see this stuff. Hell, I don't even want to do this stuff, but it's my model, so here we go. So the touching up is done, and I don't know, I'm really happy with the way these guys are looking. They're dark, but still have lots of dynamic things happening to them. I totally believe the whole idea that they're like in camouflage, in shadow, with the colors that I've used and how I've darkened them up. And I'm going to do something I normally don't do. I'm going to try hard this a little bit. So I'm rolling the dice, so to speak. Specifically, I want to do something with the capes to give them more shadow. So right now, it looks cool. I mean, it's like an oiled leather cloak on all of these dudes. But I want, I don't know. I feel like I want to do a little darker. So some of these recesses are really dark. But I can probably do more. I want to push it a little bit. And so this might be a mistake. I might regret this super hard. But I'm going to try to emphasize the shadows on the deepest recesses. So it's not really blending, it's just adding some more shadows to what's already there. And so I'm going to use some of the dark tone, so this one reads as more black. And I'm just going to touch it on some of these parts. Some of these shadows. Well, maybe like this one doesn't need to have it. And so I'm not going to do what I normally do with washes. I'm going to be very intentional about where I leave them. Yeah, so here's what I'm thinking. It's just, it's just a little enhancement. It's not anything major. I'm just darkening up those very darkest or the deepest pieces of this thing. It might not add a ton of value in terms of changing the model's appearance ultimately, but I don't know. I feel like I need to try a little harder. These models are bringing something out in me that I just want to try hard to make them look really good. Maybe the models are inspirational somehow. Maybe it was that time of day or what. I don't know what the deal is, but I'm just happy with the way they're turning out, and as a result, I want to give them some extra love. The peril here, of course, is that it depends on my ability to execute. I'm not confident in my ability to execute, but I'm going to give it a shot. For this next step, I'm going to do a little more try-harding. I'm going to undo some of the work I've already done. So I've done a good job of darkening up the cloak to give it a nice oiled leather appearance. But I want to add just some highlights to some of the raised areas. I'm not going to do it everywhere. I'm just going to do it in certain places where, whatever light source might be available is actually hitting the model. So I'm not going to do edge highlighting all the way around, but I'm going to do some edge highlighting kind of at the very kind of topmost surfaces. So here, for example, the very rim, I'm just going to touch it up with a little bit of skeleton bone that I've darkened up with a bit of darker browns. And just want to add just another layer of something. Nothing too much. And I'm dry brushing this on. So there's not a lot there, but there's just enough, just a touch, just to show that there is some light effect happening. The other thing that I want to do a little dry brushing on before I move on to adding some of the details that are on this model is the black metal parts. So all the black metal, I've left it fairly simple. Well, I certainly haven't done any layering on it, haven't done any effects, partially because I wanted to demonstrate that it's, that they've blacked out the weapons. So all the weapons are coated in this black coat so that they don't reflect any light to give away their position to the enemy. But I do want to, increase the appearance of this being metal. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry brush a little gunmetal gray. It's a metallic dark gray paint, and I want to dry brush just very lightly some of these weapons so that they kind of look more metallic than they look right now. For the bases, I've been kind of experimenting a bit with using two different texture paints on the same base. It doesn't look like much now, but it gives you the idea of what I'm going for. So I kind of wanted a really like a dark base to kind of continue with the theme of my dark units, my models. And so I did this black and this gray patch. So all of my discs have those two components to it. The black is this Mordant Earth. It's a technical paint from Citadel Color, and it does the flaking stuff, as you'll see right here, which is cool, but it leaves it leaves some of the original primer kind of in the cracks. So that's something I'm going to fix with a little bit of wash, I think is the way to go. I'm not sure if that'll work exactly, but that's okay. For this gray stuff, it kind of has a grittier appearance, looks like dirt. I went with this guy right here, Astra Granite Debris, and this is the type of technical paint that leaves like kind of like dirt, gritty appearance once it dries. And so what I'm doing is to kind of emphasize the darkness of my of the terrain that this unit finds itself in. I'm going in with a dark wash. It's a dark tone from Army Painter, and I'm just kind of dropping it in there into the dried gray stuff. I'm going to do something different with the black part, but I just want to darken up what's here, and also kind of darken up whatever shows up from the primer. Some of that's still showing, so that's okay. I will darken it up with this wash. I'm just kind of stippling it on. I'm just kind of poking it. The idea is to get a nice coverage on there. And once that's dry, I'm going to come back with a dry brush and hit it with a lighter color so that I can dry brush a different color on there. So I'll show you when I get there. So I want to give the illusion that it's the same kind of color tone. It's just slightly different textures. Well, not slightly, maybe dramatically different textures. So to do that, I need to kind of make sure that they're all appropriately dark. And since the flaky bit, there's lots of gray still showing up, I'm going to darken that up too with the same approach. I don't know how well this is going to work, but hope springs eternal. The idea here is to get into those little cracks and darken them up, not removing the gray entirely, right? I could have used black paint to get in there, but I just want to darken it up. I still want some of the gray to show up, but not much of it. I'm going to try this again. When I dried up, the dark wash didn't really end up as dark as I'd like it. So I'm going to give it another pass, but this time I mixed my own wash. It's just equal parts matte black or flat black, whatever it is that you've got, and the matte medium. And so I thinned it out with a little bit of water. Not, certainly not 50, no, not 30, 30, 30, or whatever it is, 3 parts. Ugh, math is hard. Fractions are the worst. So it's about 50-50 black paint and medium, and then just a little bit of water, just to thin it down a little bit, so it's not just enormously black. And it's quite a bit darker than I wanted it to be. I wanted kind of a happy medium, but whatevs. At this point, I'll take it. I'll just do the differentiating with the dry brushing, and so I'm adding it to both sections. I wanted a less uniform color on the bases, but I'll settle for a less uniform distribution of textures, since I can't get the color the way I wanted. I mean, I could keep playing with it. Try it again, redo it, but I'm not gonna. I'll just focus my efforts on dry brushing. Basing is not my strong suit. Then again, neither is painting or building. Yeah, this is just one of my not least favorite parts of the project, but I don't know, I'm just really not as good at this as I am at other things, and so I don't enjoy it as much. I need to watch more videos and practice more on how to do this well. For instance, this is one of those places where elevation, getting some artificial elevation on your bases would be a good idea. These are essentially character models, and so having them be, you know, lifted off the base, say like in a piece of cork that makes it look like rock or whatever, it'd be cool. It would look really good on models like this. But you know, I don't have materials like that. I haven't been in this hobby long enough to collect the necessary materials. And it makes storing these models a little harder. My storage system is a bit expensive. I use Crystal Fortress kind of display boxes, and so increasing the elevation of these models, it has a price tag. I have to put them in larger, like taller containers. If I exceed a certain critical height, then I have to put them in larger containers. So I don't do a lot of the things that you would probably want to do for models like this to make them look even more awesome. But maybe someday, just not today. After ringing the bases with my traditional black paint, I gave them a good coating of satin varnish. I really wanted to take the shine down from the cloaks, and I think it did a really good job of doing that. So I guess it's time for the review. And one of the things I noticed about this paint project was I didn't do much layering at all. Like once I finished the washing and the kind of the touch-ups that you kind of need to do, there wasn't a ton left to do. Well, the washing and then the dry brush afterwards. So at least with Space Marine models that I'm used to, once you do the washing and do any dry brushing that you do, you go in and you paint some of the details, some of the layers. And I didn't do that with these models. I didn't feel like I needed to, which is, I don't know if it's weird or what, but there's just not a lot of that kind of detail. I mean, you could, right? So I could have added the little skulls on the guns and, I don't know, different colors on the pouches. But honestly, they looked really done. They looked like I'd done a pretty good job with them kind of as they are. And adding any details kind of just seemed like to force the issue. I don't know. I'm pretty happy with the way these look, particularly my one dude with red hair. I just added a coat of Fuegian orange, which is it's a wash from Citadel Color. It's a shade, I guess that's what they call it. I did that, and then I did a little dry brushing with bone white. And the beard looks epic. I mean, the beard and the hair. It looks fantastic. It's the best. It's the best hair that I've ever done on any models. And I think part of it is because the model itself. I mean, it has his bangs as a separate piece. I mean, way to go, Games Workshop. So I'm pretty happy with my paint job. Obviously, it's not perfect. I could have done some other stuff. And, the basing, it leaves a lot to be desired. I feel like I'm bumping up against my skill level as it stands. I would probably benefit quite a bit from doing some more elaborate basing. But for some of the reasons I've talked about before, the storage issues and what have you, and the materials, I haven't done that, and I'm okay with it. I'm just really happy with the way they turned out, especially with how dark everything is. I went with that motif where these guys are basically stealthing up. They're, preparing an ambush or what have you. So they're in the marsh, they're in the trees, and so everything is dark, including the weapons. There's no real metallic glint anything. The only exception is the brooch that most of them have. The only one who doesn't have them is that sniper who's in the crouch taking aim. He probably has a brooch, and it's covered by his gun. All the rest of them have a brooch, and so I did add a little bit of a metallic dry brush over them, just to kind of highlight them. But overall, it's still very, very dark, and it was intentional, and I like the way it looks. It might be too dark, but it was what I was going for. It really captures the, setting up an ambush, lying in wait, hiding in the shadows, kind of a feel that I was going for. And I didn't anticipate capturing it that well, but I think I did a really great job, without resorting to, they're just going to wear all black for all the stuff. I wanted some color there, but I wanted it to be dark. And so I really like the way they turned out. I'm just really happy with these models overall. I did have some difficulty finding how to best put these together. They all go together in a very specific way. And it's tough I imagine it's tough to paint them once they're built. Because there's a lot of crevices, there's a lot of really tight spots where, if you don't go in there with a brush, you're going to be able to see the prime. So I painted them separately, but some of these, the assembly for some of these steps, or some of these parts, is kind of ambiguous. So what I mean is, so we have separate scabbards on most of these models, which is a fantastic detail. I love the way it looks. It's like no other model I've seen. Now, granted, I haven't seen any of the new the Nurgle Marines and a lot of the newer stuff that aren't Primaris Marines. I suspect that newer models are going to have this style where they're going to have a rigidly defined pose, but it's going to be friggin' awesome. And that's really kind of what I have to say about these models. They were really cool. The poses are fantastic. The amount of detail here is fantastic. And you're able to paint these in a way that they still look good, even if you do kind of the quick and dirty approach that I did, which is, basing, washing, dry brushing, ta-da, you're done. So either I'm getting better at this, which, is possible, and it's the outcome that one would hope, or these models are just easy to do in this way. Whatever the case, here they are, Gaunt's Ghosts, painted and ready to go into my storage case. I don't know if I'll ever use these guys, but that really isn't the point. I love the models. I love the novels. I should probably reread them because it's been over 10 years, probably closer to 15, maybe 20 years since I've read them. I don't know if I'm exaggerating there, but if I am, it's just because I don't have a great sense of time. But they were fantastic novels. They were kind of the first I ever read that focused on the Imperial Guard versus Space Marines. So they left a nice mark in my noggin, and so I'm really happy to have these in my collection. And so I hope that if you get them and you're not quite sure what to do paint-wise, but you don't want to spend 80 hours on each one, consider my approach. It's quick, it's easy, and it has pretty decent results. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. Consider giving me a like and or a subscribe. And I'll see you next time on Your Average Bear Gaming. And as always, be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.